Before we start this edition of Hey Listen, I wanted to set the stage a little bit. This very first episode that you're going to hear on technology is built on some of the arguments that you find in this book right here. Neil Postman wrote this book in the mid 1980s and truly was a prophet. He was seeing what would happen in the age of cell phones in the mid 1980s. When we were going back and looking at this episode, I realized that in my excitement to talk about Huxley and Orwell, I didn't mention Postman. And you'll see that we cover Postman's arguments in greater detail in the second installment of this. But I want to make it clear that so much of what we're going to talk about here really was inspired, at least in my heart, by what Postman wrote in the mid 1980s. And so as you're hearing Kayla and I talk about these issues in this particular episode, this is a great resource. You'll want to go back if you can get this book. I think it's truly a classic. And I wanted to say this because I didn't want anybody to think that these were like original ideas of mine. I just felt like they were worth repeating. And I got so excited about just talking about those two guys from the mid 20th century that I sort of forgot to talk about Postman. So hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to Hey Listen, where we discuss faith, leadership, and the mission of the church. We're so glad you've joined us. Now to today's episode. Today we are talking technology, entertaining ourselves to death, and how that is just in the forefront of all of our minds. What does that look like for Christians? What does it look like for parents? For all of us, we are all affected by technology.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that my wife and I are kind of on the other side of raising kids in this age of cell phones. And you're about to start it.
Right.
So our perspectives are from opposite ends. And so I'm thankful for that. I think that it provides perspective for, mine's more of an overview kind of look at this. And I think your perspective on this is going to be, we've got to figure this out.
Right. We're right in that time with a soon-to-be 13-year-old. What does technology look like? But it's been affecting us in our decision-making since our kids were preschool, watching, PBS and the influence of technology on their lives.
Yeah, we see at ball games, at like events that you would take your kids to and you would think they would be engaged in the event. They're looking at a screen. Mm-hmm. I've seen kids at the zoo in St. Louis, one of the best zoos in the world, right? And there's these kids walking around or being pushed around in strollers. They're not even looking at the animals. They're looking at some augmented reality instead of the reality right in front of them. So that's really what we want to talk about, this danger that our children are being raised as much in a make-believe, augmented, illusory kind of reality than reality.
Right. And how easy it is for parents to hand them that. We're going to do this instead of, we're hoping to be proactive to avoid a temper tantrum, or this is a hard situation, or I need you to sit here and be quiet. But how easy it is to let technology parent your kids, because that's what's happening. Whatever the influence is making them who they are going to be.
Well, as we've talked about this conversation, this podcast, we realize that this is a conversation that needs to extend over probably 2 episodes. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, as we've kind of looked at it, some of the spiritual implications will come a little later in the discussion. As we looked at it, we wanted to frame where we're at. Mm-hmm. And to do that, we have to look at culture a little bit more than maybe you might realize. Because when we think about technology, we realize that so much of the smartphone technology is, 20 years old, or it's old, but it's not that old. I was certainly raised in a pre-cell phone world. But there were some visions of this long before, and some warning shots that were given. It's funny, sometimes in culture, secular, I'm not talking about religious prophets, I'm talking about just deep thinkers in the culture, in the Western culture, have been warning us about this moment. And even though some of the people I'm going to talk about here in a minute would have had no dream that you could have a cell phone in your pocket that could do the things that we can do with an iPhone, with a smartphone, they still gave some pretty good warnings. So I want to talk about that. And so when you go back to the post-war era, right after World War II, in the 1940s, there was this guy by the name of George Orwell. And most people know his two big works were 1984 and Animal Farm. And Orwell was scared to death. And Kayla, I know you. Do you remember the Cold War? Do you remember? Okay, that's yeah. No. Okay, so once again, we're showing my gray hair is legit. Okay, so I am old enough to remember the end of that. Okay, my parents' generation was the one that was scared to death. So I remember getting underneath desks for a nuclear bomb. That's ridiculous. Like, okay, nuclear explosion and you're getting under your desk and you're putting your hands over your head. But that's the world I grew up in. And my dad was a military man. He was a battalion tank commander. That's what he was trained to do. So he spent his military career training to go fight the Soviets in Germany. He would have been a tank guy in World War III. So when you're a kid, and the Soviets were a big deal. Everybody was worried that we were going to have this World War III with the Soviets, with Moscow. So Orwell saw that coming, and so he writes this book, 1984, about this totalitarian government that would take away the freedoms of people. And so I can remember how afraid people were of the government kind of taking over. And, today people still talk about, modern politicians today, if you don't agree with them, what do you call them? They're called Hitler.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Anybody you disagree with, you call them Hitler.
And so many conspiracy theories and all the things. Everywhere you look, people are, sure the government is.
Yeah, right.
Overstepped.
They're going to take our freedoms away. So that's what that was the Orwellian dystopian future. He saw these freedoms that you and I enjoy as Americans and that the Western cultures, Europe and different places like that had enjoyed. They were afraid that the Stalinists, the Soviets, were going to take that away. So he writes this book in 1984, warning of that, of Big Brother, which has made it into our vocabularies. We always talk about Big Brother and all that. So that's what we were afraid of. Turns out Orwell was wrong. That's not the primary place where freedoms are going to be lost, it looks like, because there was another guy, and his name was Aldous Huxley. And he writes this book in 1959. And the book just completely shook people up, but they just thought it was so wild, nobody believed it could be true. The title of the book was Brave New World. And that's another phrase that's made it into our vocabulary.
Right.
People use that sometimes. So in his dystopian vision of the future, he said, no, we don't need to worry about the big governments. The Western world is going to hold its own. He said, we're going to decay from within, and we're going to lose our freedoms because of technology. And he created this really weird world where people have given up their freedoms. And basically in two ways, they are placated, the young people in particular are placated by entertainment. So they only want them to have fun and things of that nature. And they've segmented society, and you're only, the really smart people only hang out together, and everybody's segmented. But how they control each group is with this technology with a drug. And so in addition to that, they also use pleasure. Like the book has a lot to do with promiscuity. Honestly, it uses that too. But the whole idea is pleasure. But what's really scary is that Huxley was spot on in showing that people will give up their freedoms if they feel good, if they like what they're getting, if it's a product that connects with them. Think about technology today. Think about how clever Apple is in creating that. And I remember the first iPhone, and at that point I had a BlackBerry, I think it was, and I thought I was high tech. And all of a sudden, the world changed. The accessibility that those phones provided. All of a sudden, you really, for the first time, had a computer in your pocket, and anything you wanted, pretty much entertainment-wise, was there. That's the world we live in. And so Huxley was talking about our need to feel good. And so when we look at the screens, like for instance, when you're on your phone, Kayla, what are you looking at most when it's not work related?
Sure.
Because I know you work hard, but when you're looking at your phone, what are the things that you're doing on your phone?
I am scrolling through Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels, occasionally on TikTok, but it's usually those short videos. That is what all of a sudden, I even intended to check my email or something, and here I am with a ridiculous amount of time later, and
Scary,
I've been
isn't it?
doing this for a long time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. We were talking earlier. You say, okay, I'm going to just look at a few things on Facebook, maybe 5 minutes, and it's 50.
Right.
And I'm one of those individuals. Email. I'm kind of addicted to email. Like I have to see what's there. It's almost like if there's 5 emails, and it drives me nuts. And then I look at my daughter's phone, and it's got like 3,000 unanswered emails. It's just, she's lost her mind. How can you do this? But everybody has a different tolerance for it. But the key is it draws you in and it keeps you. So in Huxley's novel, he has this thing called soma. And so when people are feeling a little anxious, they just take a little bit more of this drug and they feel better. And so they keep giving up their freedoms as long as they feel good. Think about those phones. Those phones become something that glowing screen. And what we've learned, some of the white paper research I did for this, there was a paper out of Wash U up in St. Louis, and they were talking about how screen time for our kids and for adults too, it releases dopamine. It's like a drug.
Right.
So now all of a sudden, what we need to realize is Huxley was right in the sense that we're giving up our time with family. We're giving up our freedoms. So we have Orwell's vision of the government taking away our freedom. So they're like Washington, D.C. or London or Moscow. But now it's Silicon Valley that has actually figured out how to rob us of our time and keep us from enjoying our lives. Now, I know this podcast starting out talking about 2 authors from the mid 20th century. They predate the cell phones, but in every generation, we're kind of afraid of the end of the world. Like we get a new president, it's the end of the world. The stock market crashes,
Right.
It's the end of the world. And so humans kind of have that, and I think we have that, brothers and sisters, because the Bible tells us that someday it's all going to end.
Right.
And we're always looking for that. And it was so much easier, I think, to think that a government would do it. But Amazon, Google, that's what we're up against.
We are choosing to have in our hand, on our lap, and in front of us all the time, that we're continuing to go to. We can blame someone else all we want, but we're the ones that continue to pull it up.
It's crazy. And then also with Huxley, he understood the power of the flesh. One of the things, I don't know his background. I know that Orwell was a BBC guy. I don't remember. I think Huxley might have been. That I'm cloudy on. But one of the things that is true for every generation, and I tell folks that when we look at our culture today and we see how depraved it is and sexually oriented it is, when you go through Facebook, if you're not careful, if you pause too long on certain things, you're seeing things that are really, really visually sinful things.
Sure.
But Huxley understood, just like if we go back into the ancient world, they had their issues with pornography and things of that nature. It's in Pompeii, they're uncovering that city like a few houses at a time, and they're seeing all these pornographic images and stuff from the Roman era, which is in keeping with what we see in the literature. I just read Suetonius's Life of the Caesars, which everybody does in their spare time, right? But all the language and the way the Caesars were acting, so like sexual sin's nothing new. But now we have this ability to, even if it's not porn,
Sure,
even if it's just the swimsuit,
an ad for an undergarment,
exactly,
right?
Your teenage boy seeing that
absolutely
is changing their physiological mind.
Right.
So we're putting in our kids' pockets direct access to this real weakness of the flesh.
Right. And if it's not in their pocket, it's in the kid's pocket that's sitting next to them.
Exactly.
On the bus, in car line, sitting in our own halls here at church. They have, if they don't have it, their friend does.
So in Huxley's vision, he believed that the society would convince women in particular to be promiscuous so that the men's desires would be satisfied. And so if the soma drug, okay, so if we can think the drug in Brave New World as the phone, and then we understand that how our phones can also connect us to carnal things, Huxley was right on both angles, that those are the two things that can completely take over a human mind. And there's been some research. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but there was some researchers that it was called Fight the New Drug, and they were fighting against pornography. And I saw this data was maybe 10 years old, but I'm sure it's been proven more and more. They say that a porn addiction is similar in terms of how hard it is to get away from it as heroin. So what we're seeing here is that the enemy, let's just call out the devil right now and say the enemy knows how we're made. Now, God really knows how we're made,
Right.
but the enemy knows how we think, and he knows how we can be distracted.
Right. And it can be such a hidden thing.
Yes.
If you are using heroin, there are going to be signs sooner. But an addiction to pornography or other lustful things through your phone, it is a hidden sin for quite some time.
And probably it won't manifest itself in the worst possible way until marriage.
Right.
And then all of a sudden expectations and relationships begin to crumble because there's this false image of what marriage is and what sexuality is. And so when we look at this issue of phones and technology, the reason we wanted to start here is to say, hey, look, this isn't a sidebar to the modern American family's life. This is front and center.
Right.
There is a reality that we're dealing with today that is as dangerous as Soviet communism felt in the 80s that I remember. It is more, I think it's more scary than Brave New World, because when you read Brave New World, you do, it's a make believe world,
Right.
and you see, okay, well, we've not become that. No, actually, I think we've become something more dangerous, more
Right.
subtle, because
Right.
it's more subtle, and it is. There are good things that we can get from our phones, and so it's one of those things that no one in the modern world, very few people, unless you get off the grid, they're not just going to chuck their phones.
Right.
But we need to realize some of the research is saying that our 8 to 12-year-olds are spending 4 to 6 hours a day,
Right.
and teenagers as much as 9. And I think as you talk to the parents, they're probably worried that kind of level of use is happening,
Absolutely,
right?
because we're seeing that in schools. And so at least in my kids' school, my older elementary kids, they are on tablets or Chromebook a lot during their day. My 6th grader is every single class of the day. And so then if we're trying to, be cautious to limit that at home, but we're watching TV or on an iPad, or we're watching whatever mom's watching because I'm scrolling. It's the numbers are staggering of how often our kids are looking at screens, whether it's educational or just entertainment.
Yeah, and it's sad. We go to a restaurant and we see people not engaging, but on their phones. I've with family, there've been times where my son will say, "Get off your phone," like, you don't even know you're doing it. And so there again, what we need to realize is we can talk about our kids being addicted to this, but Kayla, you and I are too.
Absolutely.
And we need to own that and start having conversations with our kids about the danger of letting anything take that much of your time.
Right.
It doesn't matter what it is. If it's taking that much of your time, and we're going to talk about how that does impact how we think,
Right.
our attention spans, we're going to have conversations about that. But I think we need to frame this discussion at this point and just say, this is a fight for our souls.
Right.
This may be the front line in spiritual warfare for most families today.
Yeah.
And the world, is the world going to come to an end in the next day or two or a year or so? Maybe not. Maybe it's not that bad. But down deep in my heart, Kayla, I'm afraid. There is some fear here that we've allowed technology to get such a grip on us that if we're not careful, it becomes what we worship.
Absolutely. As we've been just preparing just the last couple of days, last 24 hours of thinking through this, I have been personally just super convicted of, I do have kids who are going to be, having cell phones even in the next few years. I am not setting a good example for that in my own home. Thank you again for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Hey Listen.